So we just got out to our first spot on the reservoir. It's the first time I've ever been out here. We're gonna give it a shot and see if we can't catch some fish and see if we can't learn a little bit about the Coralville Reservoir today. So here on the first spot, I catch my first fish. It was most likely suspended under a school of shad, considering the spot was fairly deep. Deeper than most for the summertime that you'd want to be fishing for bass. A little down the way, there's a bridge piling where I hooked into my next fish. A lot more shallow in terms of the structure and where you'd want to be positioned for summertime bass fishing. Just a pretty typical crankbait type spot. Pretty much textbook summer bass fishing. So I left that spot for a minute and came back to it, keeping in line with the golden rule of bass fishing, not leaving biting fish. So I went back to where those shad were schooled up on that particular shoreline and connected with another fish. Not a bad little guy, definitely not a giant. Unfortunately, this day there were really no giants to be had. Again, a little further down the shoreline and hooked up with another fish. Again, unfortunately not a giant, but I'm not ever going to complain about catching fish. So once I got him off, I decided I would keep fishing around the area a little bit more. This particular strike's kind of funny because if you watch closely and watch my rod tip, you'll see that you can see the bite on the rod before I actually set my hook into that particular fish. If you watch it right here, you'll see it dip down and my reaction time is significantly late. I probably should not have honestly caught that fish, but I guess he must have been pretty hungry. Maybe he wasn't eating as many shad as his friends. This is the biggest one I caught all day. Probably still not even quite a keeper. Probably be just shy of keeper size. And I got him back in the water, swam off fine, good to go. Kept fishing on the spot a little bit. Right here you can see I took kind of an extended shot of my GPS unit showing the schooling shad there and kind of what was going on. You could see how thick the fish and bait fish were positioned on that particular piece of cover there or shoreline. Again, I broke the golden rule of bass fishing and left my initial spot and went further down the reservoir to find new water as I explored. This wasn't very fruitful because I found I didn't really find any fish and the water was significantly more murky. This next spot I went south as opposed to north, just a long rocky shoreline. I found a couple little ones here, but again, nothing too special. Unfortunately, the fish were not very cooperative in terms of the big ones coming out to play this particular afternoon. I think at the end of this particular video, my face kind of sums up the size of the fish I was catching. Again, another little one off the same piece of structure and shoreline. Pretty typical summer fishing, crankbait on the rocks and about 3 foot of water, which probably the bigger ones would have been out a little deeper, and I should have gotten away from the shore a little bit and extended my search radius out with the crankbait and seen what was there. The other issue that I ran into with this spot was the fact that there weren't nearly as many bait fish as were on my first spot. So I guess just restating, sticking with the golden rule of bass fishing and not leaving biting fish. It's probably not something you want to do if you want to be out there catching fish.